Born in Tokyo, Celeste moved to the States with her adopted family as a child, but not even the Pacific Ocean is enough to stop her faith from following. Besides being a writer of science fiction and fantasy, Crystal Ann also hosts her own nerdy podcast, Personified, where once a week she interviews local creators, talks Japanese culture, or narrates her own short stories. Personified can be found at SoundCloud.com. Crystal Ann Books. She's currently working to put together an anthology of short stories, is publishing a children's book in December, and plans to release the second book of the Hellscape trilogy sometime this year. We are glad she took, I was going to say 30 minutes out of her day, because obviously she's very busy, but she actually did a whole lot more. She came all the way over from Dallas. Nice. Thank you. Crystal Ann.
One of the things I wanted to find out was the audience, since you all was here, She opened her eyes and focused her vision. The last of the fluid seeped into the ceiling, leaving behind a discolored smudge on the surface. A rustling sounded as she turned her gaze to John. His hair stood out in stark contrast against the sheet, a sea of black on a golden beach. Celeste had always wanted to feel connected with others, but now she wasn't so certain. If she were being completely honest with herself, it terrified her. John sighed softly and then turned on his side. She stared openly at the chiseled lines along his back. He was a firm believer in physical and mental health and worked hard. Her eyes lingered on the pale flesh and frowned at the scar that ran from the 2 points between John's shoulder blade. It was jagged and ugly. She once had touched the uneven flesh, unable to hide her astonishment. When he had quickly moved to cover himself, she knew it was a mistake for her to do that. It was the first time his lips had grazed hers during the cold winter last December. They had spent the weekend in her father's cabin along the slopes in Aspen. It was John's first time to travel anywhere, let alone see real snow. He had lived in Texas his whole life. She would never forget that night. They were snuggled by the fire as he read his favorite bits of poetry from random online authors. This was where he found his inspiration for his work, poets that didn't receive recognition or wrote anonymously. His sculptures were profoundly beautiful. He was considered a modern Graffiti among his clients. Most of them were portraits of mythological creatures, angels, or people. John's captures of other people's lives were so inspiring and often brought her to tears. It looked as though the stone could get up and walk away. Every single detail was hand-molded, even down to the flaws. His stone fabric flowed as if it were a real garment. If his sculptures were beautiful, his paintings were even more so. He captured the very essence of his subjects. The words from each poet depicted as a scene or person, and then added such colors you would swear it was not possible for those to exist. The amount of life he placed into them was otherworldly, just like him. Celeste's gaze fell to the addition on her left hand. Encased with a silver band was a princess-cut solitaire. The center stone was her birthstone, garnet. She never found diamonds before. They were just so plain. Her eyes wandered to the heroic paintings of the floor in the room. Father spoiled her too much. He knew it was her favorite period of art and made it a point to collect things for her over the years. Each piece of furniture that surrounded her was dainty and hand-carved from dark mahogany wood. She adored the crushed red velvet that lined the pieces. The chase next to the fire was her absolute favorite. Every night she would curl up with her blanket, book in hand. Celeste knew it was old-fashioned. Most of her friends had some type of reader. But there was something special about holding a book. It brought back memories from her childhood. Mama had read to her every night. She would get an e-reader eventually, but for now, she was content with paperbacks. Celeste smiled at the crimson drapes along the windows. It was her first real purchase, one of the few things she could be proud of. She had to defend them constantly against her friends. They said it made them look like something out of a Dracula book. She stuck her tongue out at them mentally. Let them think what they wanted. She preferred it that way. Shadows spun along her marble sculptures, encasing the young mother and child holding hands. It was as if they welcomed them to the shadow realm. She relaxed, thinking that maybe this time the dream left her with nothing to fear. The tap of the Japanese maple soothed her as it brushed lazily across the house. The tree was a present from Father sent from their old home in Turkey. Celeste had always been fond of them, so for her 20th birthday, he surprised her with one. Shaking her head, she grinned at the stubbornness of the old man. A crackling came from the foot of the bed and she jerked towards the sound. She chuckled, feeling foolish. It's just the fireplace, girl. Get a grip, she scolded mentally. though she lived in Texas and winter lasted all of 3 months, she used it every year. The fireplace separated her small library from the bed, yet kept it open enough for her to see outside. Unable to sleep, Celeste stretched and pushed back the covers. With cat-like grace, she slipped from the bed, careful to not wake John. She grabbed a robe from the chase and left the room. Emerging from the hall, her attention fell to the left. Celeste's white gown billowed around her frame as she stopped in place. When the French doors opened her mother's piano, an oasis of red against the desert white walls. The keys were worn, but she could never replace it. Celeste knew it was silly, but somehow the thought of replacing it would feel as if the last of her mother would disappear. She trailed the length of the case and then pulled it back to reveal the ivory keys. She sat down and placed her delicate hands on the cool surface. Her hands felt jerky, and then smoothed out as she eased herself into the composition. Celeste swayed back and forth, lost in its melody. There was something of familiarity to it. Celeste could never remember when she learned to play it, and yet the song flowed from her fingertips. She strummed the last chord, the air thick with silence, but left her longing for the past. Why did she have to die? Her mother's smile flashed through her mind. She was always so kind. When Mama entered her room, everyone would light up in her presence. You were always so warm, Celeste thought. She rose from the bench and glided from the piano to the back doors. The moon's light drew her close, and she pressed herself into the glass, longing to feel the night on her skin. She clutched at the doors and thrust them open. The moon sensed her, emitting a soft hum as it pulsed. Her own life force felt a part of it. She looked on, captivated by its beauty. She tore her eyes away and moved from the threshold to her favorite spot on the patio. Celeste relaxed on the wooden swing, her legs dangling back and forth. Her skin shone like porcelain in the moonlight, further emphasizing her doll-like figure. She stared down from the patio ledge, the wind gently combing through her long obsidian hair. Celeste swept a strand from her eyes, troubled by the thoughts that traveled through her mind. She stared at the untouched gardens, the plant life swaying to the earth's side. It had been years since Celeste felt so wonderful. John was the best thing that had happened to her this past year. It was coming back. She could feel it. The curse was returning. She cringed as thoughts snaked through her mind. They undulated and curled, twisting around and securing a space comfortably in the confines of her head. She gasped as it bit down, pumping the venom throughout her mind, its poison lapping at the wounds. No more, she begged silently. Please. Clutching her head, Celeste screamed. The thought echoed throughout her mind over and over until it lost all meaning. She hugged her knees to her chest as the tears flowed. Images of people lost to her flashed within seconds of one another, their faces full of contempt. Smiles leered from the dark cracks and crevices. They were calling to her, begging her. For what, she could not hear. Their grip was ice cold against her burning flesh as they drew their limbs around her body. Her mind screamed in agony as each entity burned through, trying to be heard. The last image shard rained across her mind like sirens to the damned. Unable to stand it, her eyes looked upon the pure heavenly body as she pleaded to the sky. Kami-sama, we understand. I cannot escape my fate. Celeste drew herself up onto the railing and went down. The god had heard her plea. She could feel it. She shut her eyes and filled her lungs with the wintry air. It was crisp and clear. For the first time, Celeste knew what to do. A breath passed and she threw herself from the edge. beams on her dark form. For a moment, she felt a cleansing glow from the moon, and she longed to feel that light a fraction longer. The sounds of the passing cars filtered through, their drivers unaware of the fast-descending girl to meet her end. She felt the wind and looked out among the sprinkler lights, where families lay dreaming in their warm beds. Celeste smiled. It was the right thing to do. The last of her thoughts were left to the wind as the deafening glow reverberated down the street. I first started writing this story when I was probably 22.
What are you, 23 now?
Thank you very much.